What is
Yeah.
one negotiation tactic you think everyone should know?
I'll tell you this one, the most important tactic in the world, because it's based on the most important word in the world, not most important, the most powerful word in any language. Do you know what it is? I bet you do. I bet you do. The most powerful word in any language. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Oh, there were a few. Love, yes. I mean,
You're so close. No.
please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Today on 10,000 Miles, we're diving into a topic that gets me super excited. It's one of the most sort of unsung but most important traits and skills a leader could have. In my humble opinion, hands down. It's not only in business, but it's in life. And this is negotiation. There are many terms for it. People look at it in one way or another. Well, it's problem solving. But at the end of the day, compromise is about negotiation. Business deals are about negotiation, et cetera, et cetera. Today, my guest is Derek Chevalier. He's the founder of Harrison Chevalier and the creator of the CNSUF negotiation framework. It's a system designed to challenge traditional ideas like, hey, it's a win-win. And we rethink, and it forces you to rethink how deals actually get done in the real world. Derek's had decades and decades of training executives, deal makers, and leaders across industries. And he believes that the biggest mistake most people make in negotiation is focusing on the problem rather than the people in the room. You've ever heard the term read the room? We're going to talk a lot about that today. So today we're going to unpack the psychology, the strategy, and the hidden dynamics that separate average negotiators from the truly elite. Derek, thank you for your time and coming on the show today, and welcome to 10,000 Miles.
Well, thanks so much. I'm excited to be on there, and thank you for that that introduction. I sound pretty impressive on paper, so we'll see if we can bring that up during our discussion.
Derek, what I'm always curious about, and I hope the audience is as well, is that for anybody who's listened to my podcast, they'll say, well, Vic, you have so many diverse, different types of individuals and personalities and people with various skills on. And the first question I always ask is, what got you interested in your stuff? So how did you first become fascinated with negotiation?
I love that question. Well, I trained for at 14, I woke up one day and I thought, I want to be a lawyer. And so everything in my life from the time I was 14 was leading toward the Clarence Darrow type of lawyer, and that's what I want. So that's what I went to school for. And then every time I got close to going to law school, some life event happened that took me in a different direction. So at one point, I was literally finally on my way to law school, and I saw a little ad in the paper that said, negotiation facilitators wanted. And I looked at that and I thought, well, negotiation is what lawyers do. So let me find out about that. And maybe I can do that while I'm going to law school. And so I went to a cattle call of Dr. Karrass's, Chester Karrass's, and it was long ago. He was looking for some initial people to go out and train his system. So there were hundreds of people at this cattle call. And Frank Mobus got up, who was an executive vice president. He said, well, we've got 3 spots open. And, if you make it through this grueling, process, you'll be going all over the country and teaching, facilitating negotiation. Well, in that moment, I thought, this is what I want to do in life. So
That's
Frank
so cool.
said, okay, well, we have 3 spots. I'm just telling you, and we have multiple nights open. So I raised my hand in this room of 200-300 people. And he said, yeah, in the back. And I said, yeah, just to be clear, you only have 2 spots left.
That's amazing.
I can't, which made him hate me, by the way, for a long time. He goes, I was not going to let you in there. So That tells you all you need to know about me. We talk about forward thinking. So that's how that happened.
So you mentioned Chester Karrass, and when we
Yes.
did our introductory call, Derek, you asked me if I knew who Chester was, and I didn't know the name, but I knew a lot of his isms and the quotes and the things. But through our conversation, I learned that I was more familiar with Chester Karrass than I had known. So for the audience, would you do them the service of letting them know who Chet was? Because you spent so many years working in his system and with him that,
Yes.
I mean, nobody knows him better than you.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know about that, but I will tell you somebody I immensely respect. And Dr. Chester Karrass is really the father of contemporary negotiation strategy over the last 40 plus years. He had been working for Howard Hughes, and through hooks and crooks, he ended up getting a PhD in negotiation when there weren't PhDs in negotiation. He went to USC and kind of designed that specifically so that, the Hughes Corporation would pay for it. So he gets that. And generally, when they would get these degrees, these PhDs, advanced degrees, mostly engineers and other folks, they'd have a meeting, and everybody and all the top heads would go in, and they would start asking questions. And essentially, this was proving why they had paid for that PhD. So normally, Chet said, people would come in, and that time they're smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, maybe a little something in it, and people are just talking and not listening at all. Just a break time. And he said, but he came back with his research and negotiation, and he started presenting material that eventually was published as The Negotiating Game, his first book. And he said, when he started answering these questions, people said, hey, wait a second. I want to go get a pad and paper. I want to write this down. So when everyone in the room had gone and gotten their yellow piece of paper, he said he knew at that moment, I got something. And he left the Hughes Corporation and started the Karrass Corporation, which became, and it still exists, the largest negotiation seminar company in the world. They do public and in-house programs all over the world. So he is a pioneer. And
Amazing.
almost everybody that has come up in the last 40 or 50 years, whether they know it or not, is impacted by his work.
Incredible story. And I shared this with you. I said, oh, look at that. He's a Brooklyn guy. He grew up in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I got to find out because I grew up in Brooklyn as well.
Yes.
Really, really cool. So you worked in that organization for many years, correct?
Almost 15 years, just shy of 15 years. And at that time, it was fledgling. I mean, it had grown up pretty quickly. Now, there was an incredible thing that happened when you talk about marketing. How did he get going? Well, he had another New Yorker who was in the textile industry, Mel Kleeman, who saw this and may have seen the same I did. I don't think so. Mel came out and wanted to come out to California from New York, met Chet, and used his marketing background. So what Mel did was, in the old days, 40 years ago, on these airplanes, PSA and these airlines, they had a flight magazine. They still do, but it's less prolific now. Now, every airline had that same thing. So a salesman came to the Karrass organization. He said, I'll tell you what, you won't buy my ad, but I'll tell you, buy 5 ads. I'll run 3 of them. And if you don't get a return on investment by the end of that, I won't charge you. Mel's a New Yorker. Mel's like, I'll take that deal. Now, they never expected this to work, but they had a captive audience. So what an ad that is even still used occasionally was a 4-page color ad about negotiation and their 2-day workshop. And they put that out, and after the second ad, nothing. Third ad comes out, the phone rings, and once the phone rang, it has continued to ring for nearly 50 years. And at that time, there's no book. The way you learned the seminar was people would record themselves, mostly Frank Mobus, would record himself doing a section of this 2-day, 17-hour program. And then they'd hand you a tape and say, hey, memorize this. So
Wow.
what I did, though, wanting to be a lawyer, I studied law, pre-law, but I also studied acting because I thought, well, you're acting as a lawyer. So what I did, I took
you figured, Derek, you figured if you weren't going to be a lawyer, you may get a chance to play one on TV.
Exactly. I was ready. So
you were coming at it all angles.
Yeah, I was covering my bases because there was no guarantee. And the way they got selected was they gave you one of these tapes and they said, okay, show up and do this before, Chet and Frank and a couple of 3 people that had already made it through. And they determined if you would make it through to get an audition in real life. So I went through that. I got the audition, and now I'm going out to do the 17-hour under supervision. So how did I do that? Well, with an acting background, I took the entire 17 hours and I listened to it and transcribed it word for word with large 3-inch letters in bold type, like a script. And I memorized all 17 hours. So the reality was, by the time I showed up, I actually knew that better than a lot of them because they do these tapes and then go do another tape. I had this stuff in my brain. So that's, and I fell in love with it, going out there. And there's a little bit of what I later called edutainment. Because when you're doing a live event, you can't just be sitting up there, doing it like, an engineer or something. You have to have some fun and engage people. And that's the part of it I like too. So I had this script and I'd go out and I'd memorize a lot of this and I'd do it. Now, I'll tell you, that changed my life too, because what people didn't realize, there were at one point, maybe 10 of us going all over the world doing this workshop. And the workshop is filled, even to this day, with lots of stories that are told in the first person. So I'm telling this story, and there's, 60 people in the room. Guy raises a hand and he goes, this is interesting. He said, my buddy was at a seminar in another part of the world. And he said, he told me about it. And he said, that guy told the same story you just told. And I said, interesting, isn't it? And he said, you mean these stories that everybody's telling, you're not actually telling a first person story, you're telling something made up? And I said, well, we're doing the seminar all over the world. There's 10 of us or so that are doing this, and it's a metaphor. So we went to lunch and, people go to lunch, and we actually provided lunch, come back for lunch, and people all but have their chairs turned around. They are.
Oh, no.
People were so angry because nobody realized when you're doing this presentation, I'm doing it in the first person. So they think every story I'm telling was me telling it. But I'll tell you how that changed my life. I felt so bad that I went up during a break to the guy and I said, listen, I had not thought about that. And I said, I hadn't thought about it from the standpoint of somebody being in the audience and believing that every word they hear is first person. I said, sure, I'll make a commitment to you right now. I said, from this day forward, I will never tell another story in this program that isn't based upon my own experience. And I kept that promise. And that's fantastic. Now, ultimately, in going out to find an example or involve myself in example in every instance across that 17 hours, that's where I kind of started thinking and reading other source material. And that's where I ran into opportunities that ultimately became the foundation of Snuff.
So it was kind of, that was sort of the tipping point moment where you realized that the traditional negotiation theory was incomplete?
That was part of it. So over that 15 years, one of the things I realized was this, and this is another story. So I had a love, maybe not so love-like relationship with Chet. And I haven't shared this before, but I love Chet. And in the back room, he would go, you're the best we got. But in front of people, he would never say that, never say. And I would go out and I'd bend the rules a little bit. I had my script, but I would go off script often based upon who was in the room. So Chet started sending people after me to make sure that I did it by the book. So somebody would just show up, right? And be, okay, we're writing down if you're doing it. So finally Chet decided, I got something for you. So I got this gig that included 250 people at the same time. So Chet decided, Derek, you can't do 250 people at the same time. I said, oh no, I get paid on how many people are in the room. I'm pretty sure I can do 250 people. Chet said, no, I don't think you can. So he goes, we're going to break the thing up to 125 people in the room. I said, great. So he goes, and I got this person, who does this by the book. So we go in and he goes, and by the way, everything needs to be on time because you're doing it at the same time. So you need to have breaks and have lunch all at the same time. So Chet's, he's got me. And I'm like, oh my God, I was so scared. So I go in there. Now I'm fudging a little bit, and there's 125 people here. There's 125 people there. Now, for the first time in probably a year, I end on time. In fact, a little early before lunch because I'm scared, right? I know they're getting clocked and we're getting watched. And I go over to the other person who's doing the presentation. And just before she's breaking for lunch, someone raised their hand and they said, hey, by the way, I have a question. He said, I know you're sharing all these stories, but I have a specific question about our specific business, and I'd like you to answer it. So he asked the question, and the presenter said, well, Dr. Chester Karrass knows what he's doing, and I'm going to address that later in the program. And he said, no, wait a second. Can you address that now? And she said, well, I'm going to address it later in the program. And he said, could you address that now? Now, the reality is, I don't think she had a clue how to take the material from the book and her head and present that and put it in to answer his question. So she doesn't answer his question. She goes, well, wait till after lunch. So they break for lunch. Now, what happens? We go to lunch. Kind of had that feeling that I did when all the people were all but turned around, not looking at me during lunch. You heard all this chatter throughout the room. Come back from lunch. When we get back from lunch, there are literally 200 people in my seminar and 50 people in her seminar.
Oh,
and from that moment on, I did the seminar the way I did the seminar, and just the way because that was always the issue for me, was that we were taking companies' situation and stuffing it into the framework rather than having a framework that could be built around the company, the issue, or the individual. And that's where there was a big issue, right? So when I went back and I finally saw Chet, he goes, I heard about what happened. He goes, I'm pretty sure you did exactly what you needed to do. And I said, yeah, I pretty think I did what I needed to do. He goes, well, the client's asking for half their money back. And I said, well, Chet, you can't give half the money. I said, they can only get 25% of the money because the second half of it, they were all on my side. And he goes, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I had the greatest respect for him. And to this day, Snuff would not exist without that relationship with Chet. And I still think for a lot of people who are primarily focused on transactional negotiation, there is a great deal that can be learned and benefited from the Karrass program, just like the Harvard and from that matter, Chris Voss's program. Although, of course, I think that there are fundamental flaws in all those programs as well that have been identified and corrected by Snuff.
So tell us about Snuff.
So
what's the acronym stand for, and what are its components?
Yes. So comprehensive negotiating strategies, universal framework that sounds like, phonetically snuff, because that's as close. That's what I see in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Snuff is as close as it gets. So the idea was to go back all the way to Sun Tzu and ask a question. Look, people have been negotiating for thousands of years, and you can go back and what works today that worked then, and what doesn't work because of, let's say, technology. Now
Mm-hmm.
what works today that worked then was, you take Sun Tzu. He had a great example, for instance, about the Suijan serpent. And he said, I approached negotiation or battle like the Suijan snake. And he says, if you attack the snake at its head, it gets you with the tail. If you attack the tail, it gets you with its head. And it attack you
Mm-hmm.
in the middle, it gets you with the tail and the head. And he said, that is the way I approach battle. So I was fascinated that I got to go see one of these snakes. What did I eventually find out? There's no such thing. So what works today that worked then, and there's lots of examples of this, you can tell a story 3,000 years ago that people can or cannot verify, unless you go out and look for the snake. And if people believe it to be true, it's true. Perception trumps reality. And we see today that is true today. Something can be
More than ever.
absolutely, yes, untrue.
More than ever.
But
Yeah.
if people choose to believe it, perception trumps reality. So that is still true today. Now, there are a lot of things today that aren't true. For instance, in Chet's program, he has a rule many of your guests are going to recognize. Don't split the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he came up with that rule in the 70s. In the 2000s, Chris Voss came up with the most popular book in negotiation, contemporary book, and said, never split the difference. Well, the snuff framework came along and said, do either of those, don't split the difference or never split the difference, do they work today? The answer from a snuff point of view, not at all. Because when you teach somebody not to do something or never to do something, you simultaneously teach them to fail in any instance where what you told them not to do is exactly the thing or the only thing that would create a solution. And you've told them not to do it. So that would end up with a deadlock where you might have had an outcome had you bent that rule. So we don't teach people never split the difference. For instance, we'll teach when to split the difference, how to split the difference, and how to determine who to split the difference with. That's an example.
So how would you define the outcome of an exceptional negotiation?
Exceptional negotiation. Well, depends on what side I'm on. Okay, so if an exceptional competitive negotiation is one where we kick the other side's butt. That's exceptional, right? Now, fundamentally, say something that people are going to have a problem with probably. The fundamental purpose of competition, fundamental purpose, is to obliterate the other side. It's not to compromise. There's no, AT&T didn't want anybody else to have a phone company. The trains, Microsoft doesn't want any other company. Google doesn't want you going. Every monopoly wants to control and obliterate every other piece of it. Now, they allow some competition because you need that in order to increase your own prices or have comparison in the market. But if they could, they would obliterate all of it. Now, that's the starting point. So when you ask me that, so if I'm on that side of a competitive standpoint, I would obliterate everything. But when I'd said obliterate everything, it would be just short of extinction. Because if we're going in to obliterate anything, we want just enough left that we can use the remnants of that to rebuild the society or the company in our own image. And then we can show a little benevolence. So that's one part of it. If I'm on a cooperative side, that means between obliteration, which is war, which we're experiencing at this moment, obliteration, and that's what we would like to do right now. We don't want to leave some of it. We want to leave all of it except enough to rebuild in whoever's image is making that. On the other side, you have what is often today called a both win or win-win. Now, in the SNUF system, both win or win-win is in the middle of a continuum. So that's another particular about the SNUF system. It reigns on a continuum, not a win-lose, win-win, or lose-lose. It's a continuum because life and business run on a continuum. There's shades of gray. It's not black and white. So on one side, the black is obliteration. On the other side is complete light. We're married. We're one and the same altogether. And between those two extreme points, there are degrees of cooperation. So where I end up on that continuum as to an excellent outcome depends on which side I'm on, but it also depends on a couple of fundamental quantitative elements, and here they are. It would be that you and I, Vic, are in a negotiation. We enter with information that we know neither of us has. You have information from your side, I have from my side. Now, what most people do is go into the negotiation and look to create an outcome that they prescribe before they went in. I want to get X price. And if I get X price, I'd walk away saying that was a win. But I may have left twice as much on the table that I never asked for. I'm never going to know about it because I was satisfied when I hit a limit I set. So vice versa for you. So you have a target that you set, you hit that target, you walk away, and we both walk away thinking win-win, not knowing that what we left on the table was substantially better than either deal that we came out with. So in the SNUF system, we're going to look at the outcome of a negotiation based upon how much of the outcome is based on information or data we did not have access to when the negotiation started.
So, boy, I've had more thoughts on negotiation in the last 26 minutes than maybe in the last 26 years. So thank you for the opportunity to think about that. And I can't help but share an experience and ask for your insights on this.
Sure.
Let's take corporate America as an example. And I'd say for the last 20 years, I have watched vendor management organizations approach business with that total obliteration mindset in negotiation. The challenge that I've always had with that is that you're obliterating the very entities you're expecting to be bolted alongside of you to perform a service or provide a product or a good that you expect to be sustainable, scalable, ready, available, all the bulls you could possibly think of. But you go in for this total obliteration from a price perspective. When I was at a very large banking institution, and a couple of Wall Street firms, it was very famous for them to come up at the end of the year and go to some of their biggest contracts and say, hey, your contract is up and I can't. And this would be like the first week of December and it's going to run out on January 1st. And let's say we have thousands of resources with this company. And they say, hey, we need a 10% price cut across the board. Yep. Okay. And they go for obliteration. They hardball them. That's an example. And so I always said, if you're forcing them into this 10% price cut and they're picking up a COLA of, 3 to 4 to 8, depending on how you really calculate it, could be 9, 10%. Something has to give. You're going to get less. The service is going to degrade. I had another example where we, at another bank where we had secured this agreement with a software company and morphed that relationship over years before I inherited it to such a point where they were holding them so hard to the letter of the contract, but the contract was so vague and the company made a mistake of expanding what it was doing by 10x without even 2xing the price. And so when they came to me and said, systems won't perform, everything's broken, we can't do certain functions on the 28th through the 31st of the month because everything's blowing up, I sent a team in and said, we've choked them to the point of not being able to provide. They need a $4 million uplift in just the infrastructure to be able to appropriately scale. But based upon the fees we pay for this service, there's no money in it. Right. So we're getting what we pay for. So there are a few stories there, but I know you've come across this.
1,000%.
Because I know it's prevalent in all these businesses. When you're out there coaching and teaching, I get the negotiation where it's win or lose and there's nothing in the middle and it's total obliteration of the enemy. But in most people who are probably listening, they're working towards a cooperative effort as the end, a commercial arrangement. What is there a hybrid? How would you coach people through that? What should they be thinking about during those negotiations?
So, that's a great question. And yes, to that question, have I experienced it? Yes. And do I come to the same conclusion that you are, that it is both predatory and ultimately you're going to choke off your vendor? Now, do you care about that? In a competitive environment, in a competitive corporate environment, do I really care? Not if I have an alternative. If I have an alternative, I say I care. Maybe I care, but no, the reality is that as a corporate institution, I do not care if that company goes out of business because I'm not getting paid based on that. I'm just going to go find somebody else, a newer place, and maybe even build. And instead of giving them the $4 million, give it to somebody else, renegotiate my terms with them, and then repeat that process with a brand new vendor that I'll wring out over a number of years. So that decision is determined by the character of the company and the leadership in the company. And I find that from a competitive perspective, that meets the test, because my objective is not to be caring about them. My objective is to take them out and reflect my own numbers. Now, does it make sense in what I call an emerging integrated global economy? Of course not. Because ultimately, the economy and the number of vendors become smaller and smaller and smaller, and the community, the global community, becomes a reflection of itself. So the reality is this: if we're in there's a lot of advantages in a cooperative situation, but here's the cooperative situation and what dictates a cooperative versus a competitive a situation in the SNUF framework. I'll tell you what it is. The amount of access I have to data that you restrict my access to. You see, the negotiation starts, the competitive negotiation starts at the point that you will no longer share and let me have the same access to data that you do. If we're in a cooperative situation, there's no reason why we aren't sitting down together and putting all of our data on the table and then coming up and crafting the best possible structured outcome. But in a competitive world, most people will not do that because they're not willing to take the risk of sharing that data. So part of the SNUF objective is to identify how far you're willing to share access to data that otherwise you would tell me is proprietary. Because the minute that you say I can no longer have access to that data, I know two things. One, you know things you're not sharing with me. And two, you're choosing not to give me access to it. Well, because I don't know what you know that I'm not having access to, that by definition creates a unilateral position on your part. And therefore, I am now in a situation where my objective is to take advantage of what I do know. So your question was, how do we create more cooperation? Well, it is by sharing risk. Now, we don't have to share everything, but the outcome of a cooperative negotiation is dictated by how closely our risk and reward is actually built within the restrictions that we have. So,
Yeah.
right. And that's a
So, I'm going to
way
go
of
back to
thinking.
I'm going to go back to the case in point. So the company that needed $4 million of infrastructure, I was the head of technology for a loan origination organization at this particular bank. We closed tens of thousands of loans per month. Okay.
Right.
And largely about a third of those loans closed in the last 3 days.
Right.
And the last 3 days of the month would crawl to a halt.
Right.
And loans would get deferred, and we'd push people into the next month, and all kind of downstream impacts would happen. So 10,000 loans, you make about $8,000 a loan net on these things. That's $80 million.
Right.
Okay. You do the math. Let me double check that. 3 zeros, 1, 2, 3, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4 more zeros. One. Yep. $80 million. Okay. If the impact were only 10% on a monthly basis, it's an $8 million impact. And that impact can be derived right from, there are tens of thousands of people in the organization who are ineffective. There's customer deferments that we're doing. We're putting people up in housing because now we're going to close on the first, second, or third, and they largely sold their home in the morning before they came to the closing table. So my estimate at the time was very conservative, $8 million on a monthly basis.
Right.
$4 million in infrastructure, another $4 million in personnel expense and configuration and testing and setting, right? So I remember at the time my proposal was between $7 and $9 million, right? And I said, vendor management wants to give them nothing and force them into oblivion. They're not contracted to do anything about it. They don't have the economics to do it. You can squash the contract for failure to perform. Great, make a change. You've got tens of thousands of users on the platform. These platforms take 2 years to install.
Right.
Okay, that's what they do in a big, because we're moving a battleship. We're not nimble. This isn't 6 guys in a .com.
Exactly.
I said, so you don't want to spend $7 to $9 million and put the full resources of our firm behind helping them succeed and stand up. But yet, even if it's $8 million, that's $96 million a year of opportunity. It's gone. Maybe we feel 50 of it in hard cash, and the rest of the stuff we're never counting beans on anyway, to avoid spending $8 million. And I did that pitch in a very senior meeting. And the very head of the mortgage division went, who has the checkbook and where do I sign right now? Exactly. This is the most common sense I've ever heard in my entire life. Exactly. But yet the negotiating skills of the people who were solely responsible for negotiating could not connect the dots between the impact and what we were doing. So when you're training these people, let's say you go into vendor management, Derek, right? Yes. This is a very key area. They're responsible for billions of dollars in the big organization of contract value. What does that look like, and how do you approach that?
Well, of course, every company is a little bit different, but the first thing we go in is make an assessment about how and why people are making the decisions they are making. The first thing we look at is how are those people paid and how are they evaluated? Because that's what they're thinking about. We're going to find out how much of that outcome, their unwillingness to loan that $7 million, is looking at it either because there's a negative impact to them to make that recommendation. For instance, they would make the recommendation of loaning that $7 million, and then that would they would be held responsibility for a loss of $7 million as opposed to the benefit that you just described. So we're going to now go back from just that department to looking at the organization itself to determine where there are internal conflicts in objectives that would make somebody come up with what otherwise looks like to any reasonable human being a dumb decision not to loan the $7 million. And what we're going to find is that somewhere between the way that person is paid or the way that department has operated within the purview of their experience, there have been many occasions in which they've made that same decision and somebody got promoted and rewarded for doing it.
Boy, that's So obvious, but yet most overlooked, right?
Most overlooked.
Show me your incentive plan, and I'll tell you how people will behave. And that's spot on, because if I'm incented, and I think about my history and working with many, many vendor management organizations, when I would go research the technology and they'd say it's $13 a widget, but I think we can give it to you for 10.
Right.
I'm like, give me an initial quote for 12.
Right.
And he said, why? I said, because we're going to get to 10. But if you give it to me at 10 and you don't leave any meat on the bone for vendor management, I know they're counting up all the beans they've saved.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And so you need to leave a little meat on the bone so they can carve the meat on the bone and go, oh, we just saved $2 a widget. There are 4 million widgets a year. We just saved the firm $8 million. We paid for everybody in this department.
And the procurement department gets credit for that savings.
Yes.
Now,
correct.
but here's what you just explained in terms of why you are now an independent person running your own shop. Because if within an organization people knew that you were sharing that kind of intelligence as a salesperson, for instance, that you were telling somebody and giving somebody that strategic insight at upper management, how would they have responded to that if they knew that was what you were doing? Probably not that happy about it. Right.
It would have been a mix, and I'll tell you the truth. There would have been a mix. The CFO would not have been happy about it.
Right.
The CEO would likely give me an attaboy, and the chief operating officer would give me an attaboy, because what I did was I just created a bridge to execution, which is where the real value came in. That $8 million that they think they saved on the widgets was 10% of the overall project's run rate save once we got in production.
Right.
So we were tripping over dollar bills to pick up pennies.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the things that you look at, and what we're talking about is the organizational structure. Now, again, in the SNUF mode, that comes under what we call omni modes, right? The organizational or institutional structure is part of what the mode group called omni modes. Now, you can guess, why do we call them omni modes? Because they're omnipresent. Every organization's limitations are reflected by the policies and institutions that created them. So where the problem is, where the personal problem comes down to me and you at our level, was not a problem that we created. It was a policy that we inherited somewhere, right? And then it depends on how skilled we are with navigating not just the external relationships that we have as you're describing, but also in understanding the internal restrictions and obstacles that are in our way, because we're negotiating always internally and externally with those we are negotiating against, and also within our own organization, because you have internal conflicts between the policies, procedures, and goals of different departments. So what we do when we want to go in is to go and look at all of the omni modes. What are the omnipresent restrictions within that organization that trickle down to the departments that ultimately are responsible for the modus operandi of the people within those departments? So depending on our ability to work with that company, if I'm only working with that company, I mean, with that division within a company, the first thing I'm going to do is try to negotiate to expand that relationship. But generally what's going to happen, because at the beginning, they don't know what kind of results I can provide or that my services are going to provide. So you'll find restrictions even within department heads and VPs who want to say, well, Derek was hired by Vic, and Vic is a senior VP of XYZ department. Well, these other departments, your contemporaries on that senior VP level, they don't want me coming in because I was hired by you. So first of all, I got to go in and show results within that department that bring attention to the organization, and that's what gives me the legitimacy to go up the food chain and talk to senior management, because nobody on that senior VP level is going to invite me in. The more successful I am within your division, the more separation there's going to be between me and every other VP there. Now, the only way I'm getting in is to go up the food chain and have somebody at that level make the decision that they are going to work with us. And so we know going in that's probably what we're going to do. We're going to test it, of course, but very often that's what we're going to have to do.
You're describing one of the many components of bureaucracy. Yes. Inside very large organizations. And I get it. And large organizations provide a lot of great things for people and for employees and customers. And most of them can't get out of the way of all these things because you're dealing with size and scale. I have a friend who's from Australia who likes to tell me how great Australia is. I'm like, what, 25, 26 million people? Yeah, of course you can get it done. You got 350 million people here. We can't run that. It's too big.
Yeah.
And I use that example company to company.
Yeah.
Hey, let's switch subjects for 1 second here. I want to jump into a bit the psychology of negotiation.
Yeah.
And there's the old thing in negotiation, the bluff. Right? Yes. The good old bluff. Are there any signals when people are bluffing and what do they look like and how do you deal with them?
Right. Well, I love that question. First of all, I just read a book that I highly recommend to you and everyone else who's listening and watching. It's a book by a psychologist named Maria Kennikova, who is a professor who also is an author who wrote a great book specifically dealing with the question you asked called The Biggest Bluff. So she did, with no background in poker, she wanted to answer that question. Is poker just a bluff and luck, or is it a skill based upon psychology and whatnot? So she went to some of the most successful poker players on earth and told them what they thought was a crazy idea. Starting from scratch, I want to sit down at the finals of the world poker table tournament and play. And they thought she was out of her mind. But they agreed to coach her over the course of a fascinating year in which she does everything I think you need to do to learn a skill. Started from scratch, talked to the experts. She had a great background in psychology herself. And she asked all the questions. Now, the end of it, I will say this. Was she successful? Absolutely. She made $350,000. And the book describes the specific answers to your question. For some gamblers, nobody who's a finalist repeatedly at the World Poker table is bluffing by mistake. And it may not even be a bluff. Whether or not something is a bluff is not determined by the person who's executing it. It's determined by how successful the other person they're doing it to believes it. Perception trumps reality, because the reality is you don't see it as a bluff. So something that is a bluff that works and you didn't know it was a bluff, was it real or was it Memorex? Right? Or because the end result is I was rewarded and you don't know you got taken advantage of. So there's not an answer to is there a specific way? She talks about in the book that every world poker player knows and reads the modus operandi, the psychology of every person that is going to be setting up that table. They know their tells, they know what they had for breakfast, they know their discipline, their background, their spending habits. And that is exactly the kind of thing that we talk about needing to know as an astute snuff negotiator. That is part of understanding the personal and behavioral attributes of the person you're negotiating with, because a bluff will work with one person, but it will not work with 10 other people. Why? Because they're not that person. You didn't build it for them. So the question is even a deeper one. is it a bluff if the other party didn't know? And if they did know what it was a bluff, well, it wasn't a very good one because you got caught.
Amazing. I mentioned something in the opening that I read about you, and that we discussed in our introductory call about reading the room.
Yeah.
And so you sort of touched on that a little bit, right? You sort of,
right.
People are different. The same thing doesn't work. How do you read the room, and what are you looking for? Are you looking for physiology, emotional state? Like, tell me what's entailed in really reading the room to allow you to adjust your strategy.
Great. Partially that happens to what you do before you get in the room. Right.
Okay.
So for an astute negotiator, if you're waiting till you get to the negotiation or the location, it's over with, because that's done. All the work has been done in the background. So before I get there, I'm looking at the history of the negotiation. I'm looking at doing a lot of due diligence about each person that is expected to be in the room. I'm looking at everything from where they grew up to where they went to school to where they live and what socioeconomic, as much as I possibly can. I'm also going to look at the history of deal making for that organization and for the people that are in the room. And then we're going to walk in and begin to test the quality of our due diligence, right? We're not going to just assume that we did that research and came to correct conclusions. Or what we're going to do is presume that what we know has some accuracy and some misnomer in it. So we're going to go in and begin to use specific tactics and strategies to test the limits of both the skill, aspirations, and the intentions of the people we're negotiating with. That's going to help us read that room. Then we're going to use specific tactics and strategies that are designed to test whether or not our read has been accurate on a broader and more specific basis. So most of what we're doing is looking at as much as we can. But here's what I want to know, Vic. When I know that ultimately you've been successful from your perspective in the last 7 negotiations that you've done, if I know that your professional reputation is one of being a successful negotiator who successfully brings back the bacon to your company, that's going to influence the way I structure my deal and my ideas to you. Because what I'm going to walk in there looking for is, how do I make Vic look like a hero in his own company? Now, most people are not going in there thinking, I'm not trying to beat you up. I'm trying to say, what do I need to do to give Vic the impression and the reassurance that when I negotiate with him, I need him to win within his own organization and be a hero within that. Now, that may entail what we do in public and the way we approach one another, because we'd be total adversaries at the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I might call you and ask for us to have a drink off the record somewhere away from the company and sit down, have a drink or two, and have some dinner and talk about what's really going to be there and how do we really get where you need to be, Vic. Because what I need to do is take my client and steer them in a direction that helps you be a hero. Now, the likelihood is we're having dinner, you talk to me, and then you believe, like, see, wait a second, Derek, what's in it for you? They hired you. And now you're talking to me like how I'm going to be a hero. I said, because ultimately my client is going to be a hero if we're successful, or we wouldn't be here. And we have to be successful in order for you to really be a hero. Because if it ends in deadlock, unless that's what you're looking for, and we can make that pretty quick, then you came and there's a deal somewhere in there that you need to get that makes you look good and one you're not happy with. I want to avoid the one you're not happy with and get to the one that makes you look to a hero. What do I need to do that? Do you know how many times after that you're going to begin to tell me what I need to do to be successful, both with my client and you. You're going to give me a roadmap, right? And then you're going to test me a little bit. Yeah. And ultimately, I'm not BSing you because that's what I want. Now, am I going to betray my responsibility to my client to do that? No. But ultimately, and I can say this on a professional basis, I would say 75% of the time, you're going to tell me things that you would never have told me in a meeting. You certainly would not have told me in a public meeting. And you're going to tell me things off the record that put you in jeopardy, either personal things or professional things about the relationship. And you're going to give me some insight. And ultimately, because I do want you to be a hero, you're going to point out where the roadblocks are, maybe not in your division, but in the rest of the division that I need to work with. And you're going to use me as what we call a third-party restrictive force to do what you could not do. But if it comes from me, you're happy about it.
Yeah.
But which you'll never admit, because it puts you in a position to be more powerful, to call more shots, which allows you to give me a deal you wouldn't give anybody else. And ultimately, was it a win-win? I don't know, but my client's happy, you're happy, and you're a hero. Now, that is if I'm looking for a cooperative outcome and I've done my homework and you're that person who needs to win and needs to be a hero. Not everybody needs to win. Some people win by shutting you down and proving that that they don't need you, right? So if I'm dealing with that, I would have a different strategy. So the strategy is always going to be built for the individual. And that is one of the biggest mistakes that I think negotiators make. They have a set of skills from their experience, and then they go into a circumstance and they pile on their experience into this local, immediate, real-time situation where a lot of times their experience is not an appropriate match. So you have a mismatch because you're trying to take your experience into a situation that is not reflective of what happened 5 years ago. So we look at our experience and say, where does it fit? And where do we need to trim it? And then where do we need to replace that experience with new insights, technologies, and tactics that are going to address the situation we're looking at today?
Let me go back to the test.
Yeah.
So you've done all this recognizance work. Yeah. You try to, you're pre-reading the room, so to speak.
Yes.
And you're rereading not only the room, but the situation.
Right.
What are some of the things you do once you're in the room, whether it be physical or virtual, to test your hypotheses and data discovery?
I can tell you one of the biggest tools that you're going to use there, it's going to be closing. The answer in a nutshell is we're going to use closing strategy. Now, which closing strategy are we going to use will depend, but I'll tell you one that almost is always going to be there. We're going to use an assumptive strategy. So that means that to test whether or not I'm correct, I'm not going to ask a question. I'm going to make a statement as though it's fact. Now, I know whether or not the statement I'm making is true or not, because I'm going to only choose a statement that I feel that I have the data to substantiate the fact that it is an accurate fact. So I'm going to test your willingness to be accurate with me by making a statement that pushes you a little bit, because I'll make a statement that says, this statement is true within your organization. And then I'm going to shut up and listen to what you say. Now, if you respond by telling me, Derek, that's not true at all, then you've certainly raised my antenna about your credibility, because now I'm thinking, wait a second, you're not willing to agree that something I know is true because you're playing a game to let me know that that's not true, Derek. Now, are you doing that because I've hit a nerve and a potential weakness? Or are you doing that because you want me to think I've hit a nerve and a potential weakness? So that's going to dictate my next move. But I know you did not tell me the truth, right? I know that you didn't tell me the truth.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So I use an assumptive close.
Okay. That's very cool. Hey, in real world negotiation scenarios, I want to just hit you with some tactical questions and get
Sure.
some short responses. So, and
Okay.
quite frankly, this will create some nice short clips for us as well. So
Okay, good.
it's good for us to have it.
Sure.
On your long list of things people say during a negotiation, is there something you can think of that is something they should never say?
Not never say, but rarely
Okay.
say. Rarely say never.
Rarely say never. Okay.
Rarely say never, because that's
like
an
that.
Achilles heel. Right.
How do you prevent price pressure? So if I'm a vendor selling you a software as a service, and I'm dealing with a CFO or a COO who's just trying to grind down that price to the lowest per widget cost, but now I'm getting dangerously unable to provide you the level of service I know you're going to need from me. You're going to be a little bit extra hands-on. I need to be more hands-on, and I dare I use the term high maintenance, but how do I avoid, or how does that salesperson avoid price pressure?
So, we're not going to avoid the price pressure, but we could, because it's going to come just because of the natural difference between sales and procurement, right? They're natural enemies, right? You want to sell it high and you want to buy it low, and I want to sell it high. So we're not going to avoid it, but we can neutralize it. We neutralize it by first identifying where that price pressure is coming from. Right? Is it coming from you personally? Is it a tactic that you're using because that's your negotiating style and you're only focused on the numbers themselves? If that's what it is, partly what I'm going to do to neutralize that price pressure is focus on the cost of that pressure to you, not to me. Most people do the opposite. See, most people, when I'm afraid and you're beating me up, I explain to you how badly you're beating me up. Well, if you're a sadist, I'm just making you feel good. Right?
Yeah, if it's take all enemies.
Yeah, you're making me hot now because I'm telling you, you're beating me up so bad. And the more I say it, the more you like it. But if I turned that around and I said, I'm not worried about the cost of this to our organization. We have lots of options. But I am concerned about the cost to you in terms of if we continue in the direction that you're going, what that forces us to do, of course, is to have consequences on the way we're able to deliver the service to you. And the cost to you, if that occurs at 10% of the business that we're scheduled to do, I'm concerned that that's a price you're not willing to pay.
I love that. I love that.
So I'm
I absolutely love that.
Focused by changing the direction of the perception of pressure, right? By focusing away from me and back to you, what it's going to cost you, not what it's going to cost me. Because if I'm frightened, I'm going to act like I'm frightened. And if I act like I'm frightened, I'm concerned about the number, as opposed to being focused on the value that I'm providing to you, because you're not focused on that either. You're focused on the dollars and cents.
Yeah, it's amazing. Hey, there are some people that are just natural negotiators, for lack of any other term.
Yeah.
And then there are some people who have the very formal training and maybe even go through Chet's or your programs and go, they get this big awakening. What is it about the people that are naturally down the road a bit? Maybe not perfect, maybe not, because you take a natural and you give them training, they're even better.
Right.
But what is it about the people that naturally have good negotiation instincts that you find to be true?
They are very often people that develop their negotiation skills either by experience, primarily through experience, right? So they've come into it, and even as a child, they may have been, and they don't even know it, they have an ability that people believe them. So there are lots of physical characteristics that you'll find. Great negotiators often look really good. You rarely see a great, ugly negotiator. Do you know why? Because
That's great.
So they look good and they look the part of the industry that they're in. So they're groomed within that. They look the part, they feel the part, and they act the part. They drive the right car. They wear the right clothes. They say the right things. And then they see some success as a result of that. So that reinforces, now they get experience within a particular industry and they grow that experience, and then over time they elevate. So what I find is you have a lot of great negotiators who are naturally gifted. They're naturally gifted within a specific area of negotiation or industry or sector. Take them out of that sector and they'll fall on their face, because they're going to try to take that success from a particular industry that has particular standards, particular idiosyncrasies and relationships, and turn around and apply that in a industry that maybe it doesn't have those same, and you're going to look like a fish out of water. So I find that the great negotiators naturally, often, as long as they're in their pool, they're very good and they excel. Take them out of that pool and put them in another pool, they're not going to be so good. That's the difference between somebody who's skilled and somebody who's learned by experience or who has a natural gift.
That's interesting because, I have some good examples of people who are great negotiators in their space or in their skill,
right?
But have in business.
Yes.
But yet have not been able to leverage that in personal relationships.
Right. Yeah. Because the idiosyncrasies are completely different. If you applied a tough business strategy to, and then took a business strategy into a relationship, not going to work. As a matter of fact, I just saw a film that was an Academy Award called The Materialist. And that is one of the themes of it, because, the woman in it is a matchmaker, and she looks at how you dress and where you were educated and how tall you are and how much income you have and how old you are and how good you look. And there's a scene in which she's talking to somebody who on paper is a perfect match for her. And then ultimately down the road, because they both are beautiful and all these things. But she says to him, wait a minute, you grew up with money, you have money, you've been successful, you are a 10 out of a 10. I grew up poor, I have debt, I didn't come from your world. Why are you interested in me? And he says, well, I don't want all those things. And that's one of the premises of the relationship, because here you go back to negotiation. This is a snuff insight. People do not know what they want or what they think until they have an opportunity and there are consequences involved. See, I don't want that type. Why? Because you never had that relationship with her, so it's a new candy bar. Now, ultimately, I'll encourage your audience to go, watch the film, but there's a pretty high likelihood that relationship is not going to work out. They'll consummate it. And, but pretty quick, it's going to become what I call broccoli, and nobody wants broccoli every day. And when that day comes and there's no more substance to all of these things in a business arrangement. And he said, yeah, but it's a business arrangement relationship. And she goes, yeah, but I don't love you. All the money in the world can't change that. I don't love you. Yeah, you're a perfect Tim, but I don't love you. So the reality is that we have to be careful about what we say we want when we don't know, or there are no consequences for our believing what we would do. You hear somebody say, well, if it was me, I would do X, Y, Z. Easy to say,
but it's
because
not
you don't. Exactly.
Yeah. It's not you.
There's no consequences for you. Now there's skin
when you
in the
start
game.
Any conversation with, well, if it were me, I would, you've already lost.
You lost.
Because it's not you. And if it were you, you'd have the ability to go do that. But it's them.
It's them.
It's them, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
What is one negotiation tactic you think everyone should know?
I'll tell you this one. The most important tactic in the world, because it's based on the most important word in the world. Not most important, the most powerful word in any language. Do you know what it is? I bet you do. I bet you do. The most powerful word in any language. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Oh, there were a few. Love, yes. I mean,
You're so close. No.
okay. No,
No
okay.
is the most powerful word in any language. It's unequivocal, it's direct, and it causes other people to be left to their own devices. So if you want to test somebody's personality in any place in the world, it doesn't matter. You go to any country. I've been in the middle of the jungle where there is nobody who speaks English except other people I'm with. And it's always the result the same. People in any culture, any place understand no. And when I repeat no several times, it really becomes a wall that will test the reaction of other people. It's powerful. No. Not an explanation.
You should use that as a tool.
Absolutely.
As a tool. So just
of
no.
Course.
Hey, this is $12, but I'm going to give you $7. No. Simple. It's
and
finite.
What am I going to do to that? What I'm going to do is, if it's a transactional, you know very well, no, because 9 out of 10 people are going to say no because blah, 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 blah. And then I'm going to attack your rationale. Right.
Exactly.
But if I'm just like, no, you're going to explain to me why I should. In other words, you're going to tell me, well, you need to do this. No.
Amazing. I love that. So simple and open-ended.
Open-ended,
right?
yes.
Because you've created this whole cloud of mystery around why no.
Yes.
Right? And now you've got them thinking and hunting and pecking why no, but it's finite. It's no.
No. And guess what? Especially if you're dealing with someone who just coming off of 17 yeses. Like they're powerful, they're good, they're going all day. We're doing for $12, you can go somewhere else, a take it or leave it approach. Okay, no. Well, don't you know you're going to lose it? No.
Incredible.
The most powerful word in any language. It's very powerful. Yeah.
So, Derek, we've covered a lot of ground. I want to give you an opportunity here. If you think there's something that's, when you got on this platform with me today to have a conversation, you said, I got to make sure we talk about this. It's one of the most important part of the things that I think I do in message, aside from getting to how people can get in touch with you, because we'll get there. But you know, what in our conversation, is there a topic you think we left out that's vital?
Well, I think we cover a lot of things, but I think that one of the most important concepts to share with your audience is one that you did touch on, and that is to say that negotiation is involved in every human interaction. So people think that negotiation, they think of it in transactional terms, buying and selling goods and services. What I think people want to know or should know is that for a negotiator, a trained negotiator, there are no conversations that don't involve some aspect of negotiation. The difference is that person is acting on purpose and you're acting by habit. And ultimately, if in any time they want to take advantage of you, it's pretty easy to do because you've given them every opportunity to do it. So if we understand that negotiation is part of every human interaction, ask the questions, how and why. How does that affect me? And why is that, or why isn't that true? And people will simply understand that there are so many interpersonal dynamics to negotiation. Now, let me say this also. Who do you think are the most effective and powerful negotiators on planet Earth?
Women.
Ha ha! I have
a bit of tongue in cheek.
Well, there's tongue in cheek. Well, I think that's true to the extent that a woman has something that a man wants. there's no more powerful creature on earth. But to the extent that a woman doesn't have something that a man wants, then there's no weaker character in the world. But the answer to that question of who are the most powerful negotiator, they're children.
Children. Interesting.
Because
I was going to follow up. In all seriousness, I was going to follow up with someone who has nothing to lose.
Well, a child has something to lose, but they're great negotiators because they don't care about what you think. In other words, a child at 5 years old, and I've done this. I've gone to kindergartens, and where you go into a kindergarten and you talk to a call and you say, hey, do you have any questions? Every kindergartner has a question. Everyone has a question. Now, every parent knows that when you say no, and let's say you have multiple kids, how is it that your kids know who to talk to, mom or dad, when to talk to, and how many times to send people in? Because ultimately they know how to, and nobody teaches them. So you talk about a natural negotiator, and 9 out of 10 times they get what they want. Why? Because ultimately they're going to say why, until you don't want to hear why anymore. And you go, okay, but don't ask me again. They go, yeah, we'll never do it again. Till next time. And then they get what you want. Now, what happens is a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, even at that time, what happens is they're focused on what they want. They only care about what they want. They're only concerned about what they want. What happens to a child about middle school is that they suddenly become interested in what their friends think about what they want. And now they're more concerned about what their friends think than about what you think or about what they think. And there's that whole period in middle school as they're discovering who they are as young adults when that's the flip-flop. And the other thing that happens at 5th grade, of course, happens at recess. 5 years old, you go, anybody questions? Yeah, me. Now, right after I get done, the kids are going to go out and go to the playground, right? So the teacher says, okay, are there any questions? And, nobody raised their hand. Then the one kid goes, oh, I have a question. And the rest of the 35 kids look over there like, do you know we are going to kill you at recess? And that, because by asking that question, you delayed the end of this thing and ruined us getting out of here, right? And that kid will never ask again. This is why I never go into a training situation and go, are there any questions? Because when I taught university, no. But if I would say, when we've had 5 more questions, we're going to get out of here. Now I got 12 questions. Right?
Ah, interesting.
Now I got 12 questions because I've given you a reward as opposed to a liability or a negative consequence.
Interesting. Hey, Derek, if folks want to reach out to you and engage you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, thank you. You can go on the website, h-c.com, or just put in my name anywhere on any platform and we'll come up. But call me or email me. We have a 30-minute, no cost, no obligation, no BS consultation to answer questions about specific questions that you might have where we can, hopefully our objective is to come up with a few action items that you can take. The results of that, you'll decide whether or not it's worth calling back, and we do okay with that. So we're not going to sell you anything, but if you have questions, give me a call and let's have a conversation. Schedule it online, very easy to do. And the other thing I highly recommend that people do and would request that people do is certainly support the book Evolve or Be Slaughtered, Negotiation for the 21st Century, which is on Amazon and almost every other platform. But we've got 4.9 reviews on Amazon, 5.0 independent reviews, and I'm very, very proud of it and would be honored if folks would support our venture there.
Fantastic. Well, I will include links to your website, to the book, and all of your other social media presences that you may have in the description section of this episode. Derek, what a fascinating hour and 20 minutes for us. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You're not only a very insightful guy, but a great storyteller, and you explain things in a way that I think the audience is going to really bite onto and bite into and understand. So thank you for taking the time.
I think
with
that's
us today.
you, by the way. I think you're a great interview, and I'm too old to have to say that to anybody or BS. I love that about getting older. I don't care. I can tell I can tell the truth. But I love what you do, and your curiosity is at the foundation of the way you approach it, and you're genuinely curious and also contributing. So it's been a pleasure to meet you and talk with you, and I very, very much feel honored to have had that time with you. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, and have an amazing evening. Take care.
You too.
Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.